Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every week. I am Paul Indiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
First and foremost, my condolences to you. Just told me that you lost one of your close relatives. So my condolences to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ndugu Paul.
Right.
That is the life that we have to deal with. That's the reality we have to learn how to navigate and negotiate, unfortunately. May, of course, my uncle's soul remain in eternal peace. We are talking about Professor Augustine Hatari, a filmmaker, and a guy who really, in many ways, influenced my interest in the media. Dr. Augustine Hatari. He taught in the Caribbean. He taught at the University of Dar es Salaam for many, many, many years. He made some films. And he actually, at one time, believe it or not, was a stringer of the English service of the Voice of America in the early 90s. I was talking with Greg Pidio, who happened to be the chief at that time. He also was saddened by the passing away of Dr. Augustine Hatari.
Let's start in West Africa. Again, we see protests, young people taking to the streets, opposition members are taking to the streets, demanding the Ivorian president not to run for a third term. We've often talked about these third term candidates, people who really don't want to go, even when their terms have come to pass. Here we are talking about Alassane Ouattara, the president of Ivory Coast. He looks like he wants to put his political career on the line at this point.
I think that in many ways, what is happening in West Africa, and especially in Ivory Coast, is both a good and a bad sign. A good sign because at least the youth and the civil society are essentially asserting their constitutional rights, meaning they are in fact protesting the decision which they say is unconstitutional for President Alassane Ouattara to run for what is notoriously referred to as a third term. In effect, a third term. On the other hand, of course, it is again unfortunate that not only is it Alassane Ouattara, but you can see it across the African continent. There are many, many countries whose presidents have engaged in the political, constitutional shifting of the goalposts once their term is coming nearly to an end. That's not a good sign politically. But you know, there is a historical reason for that. Because when you look at a man like Alassane Ouattara, a man whose mentor was the Ivorian founding president, Houphouët-Boigny. Houphouët-Boigny ruled with an iron fist. He was, in effect, who someone would probably refer to as a presidential monarch. He had no business to deal with term limits. He was there to stay until divine intervention called in early 1990s. That is the man who first appointed Alassane Ouattara as the prime minister. And apparently, Alassane Ouattara secretly admired Mr. Houphouët-Boigny, who had the reputation, by the way, of being more Catholic than the Pope himself, and being more French than the great French general Charles de Gaulle.
Of course, I like your analogy of being more Catholic than the Pope. He's arguably one of those guys who built the biggest basilica in Yamoussoukro, a place dominated by actually Muslims.
That is correct. And by the way, Yamoussoukro was his hometown, which he in fact declared the official capital of the Ivory Coast. Until then, the capital of the Ivory Coast was Abidjan. And you know, when you talk about that basilica in Paul, it cost at least 200 million US dollars, which he basically claimed to have gotten from his own account. And it's quite possible he got it from his own account because, after all, under his tenure, there was barely any difference between his personal account and the state coffers.
Shaka, you referred to Alassane Ouattara looking at Houphouët-Boigny as his role model. One could argue that at the time when Houphouët-Boigny was president of the Ivory Coast, the times were different. The country was doing very well under his stewardship or leadership, but you could argue that the times were different, the political environment was different, and they had nothing like what we have today, where there is competition for political space or political parties. They've literally opened up their democracy. So when you say that he admired a guy who was in power until his death, does that mean that he aspires to be that kind of guy?
Well, when you look at Houphouët-Boigny, who, by the way, decided, in fact, to conveniently change the pronunciation of his indigenous African name to sound French, Houphouët-Boigny. Of course, I have to apologize that I am basically French challenged. So no one should take me as an authority on that pronunciation.
That makes
But
two of us.
But having said that, Ndugu Paul, Houphouët-Boigny, by the way, during colonialism, was a minister of state in Paris. He was a minister of state in Paris because, for the French, their colonial policy was based on what they called assimilation. If you spoke French like a Frenchman or like a French woman, if you went to the Sorbonne, the prestigious University of Paris, you ate the type of food that the French enjoyed. You basically used the forks like they did and put on the type of clothes or fashion that the French did. You were considered to be French. So Houphouët-Boigny had in fact earned his right to be French. And even when he became the founding president of Ivory Coast, he was in fact effectively an agent of the French interests. Mind you, he also admired a one-time very strong, prestigious king of France, King Louis XIV, 1655, the man who is popularly associated with "L'État c'est moi." I am the state, and the state is me. If you could see President Houphouët-Boigny, who I referred to as critics referring to as a presidential monarch, having his mentor in King Louis XIV, who reigned in 1655, you can see that Africa has a very, very long way to go. That in fact, even when we are currently in 2020, Ndugu Paul, We are operating at the level of Europe in 1655.
Let's go to a comment here. Let's go to a Facebook commenter from Olivier. Mr. Ouattara, who became president in 2010 following a disputed election, says the constitutional changes voted through in 2016 reset the clock for a two-term limit to his presidency. So that means that he can still actually run. This is effectively going to be his first time running under the new constitution.
Olivier is correct if you look at it in the context of legalities. There is no question about it. And we have talked about this in Duguporo before. All constitutions are living documents. So we are not really talking about whether or not they can, in fact, be amended. But they have to be amended. But the understanding is, if you amend the constitution that you basically took an oath to serve, protect, defend, and uphold that particular document, then if you in fact make the mistake of changing it for what is considered to be personal and or political gain, that is problematic. And it seems to me what is going on is that Alassane Ouattara, for some reason, sees himself in the image of King Louis XIV, 1655. But the last time I checked, King Louis XIV Ndugu had no claims to a PhD from the Ivy League, from the American Ivy League, the University of Pennsylvania. Here you have a modern African educated intellectual basically in our century, operating sincerely at the level of somebody that operated centuries and centuries ago. They used to call it in Kenya during the days of President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, Nyayo, Fata Nyayo, meaning following the footsteps of the Kenyan founding president, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. So it seems to me that if there was anybody that was least expected to follow that kind of path, sincerely, not only in the Ivory Coast, but on the African continent, it would have had to be the urban, intellectual, internationally acknowledged bureaucrat, Alassane Ouattara.
Let's go to another commenter from Jean Bosco in the Congolese capital, Kinshasa. He says that I've been to the Ivory Coast. I've lived there pretty much all my life. What I see happening there is that President Ouattara refusing to step aside is going to lead to another, I guess, is going to literally destroy that country. He should take an example of our stubborn president. I'm not saying he's stubborn, but this is what John Bosco is saying, that our stubborn president, Kabila, Joseph Kabila, who stepped aside and allowed democracy to take its root. Your thoughts, Shaka?
I think that John Bosco is onto something. Whether you agree with Joseph Kabila or not, at least he symbolically did something fundamentally different from most of his colleagues on the continent. A man like Alassane Ouattara, sincerely, how can he be expected to be respected, to be believed by people that he is the only one, in as far as the Ivory Coast is concerned, who could actually occupy that position What if, God forbid, what if you have divine intervention? Does it mean that he actually goes down with the Republic of Ivory Coast? Where did he come from? Did he go to schools that were unique? Was he born and grew up in unique circumstances? Or does he in fact, or is he in fact the beneficiary of a special political intellectual injection? The injection that gives him the monopoly of being God's gift, of making him a sort of God's political gift to the Ivory Coast.
How about critics who said that this is a deja vu again? We saw this happen in 2010 when President Gbagbo, who refused to hand over power to Ouattara himself, that this could be a repeat of what happened in 2010, and not forget that former President Gbagbo was arrested and tried for crimes committed after the post-election violence that led to what we have here. We see a Ouattara trying to do the same thing. Can't he, or I wonder what people around him are telling him, if he can't learn from that history of their own country.
You are right, Ndugu Paul, but we should point out also to the audience that those crimes, by the way, at The Hague, the evidence that was tabled did not seem to be strong enough for a conviction as far as Laurent Gbagbo is concerned. It is very unfortunate that a man like Alassane Ouattara, who initially, by the way, was denied the opportunity to run for the highest position in the land of the Ivory Coast on the basis that he was not a genuine Ivorian citizen, perhaps because his parents had initially come from the northern part. In fact, the neighboring countries, Upper Volta, at the time, currently called Burkina Faso, had actually gone to the Ivory Coast as immigrants, who later became legitimate citizens of that modern political expression known as the Ivory Coast. You know, these countries are what they are, by the way, courtesy of European powers, who in 1884, at the Berlin Conference in Germany, under the chairman, Prince Bismarck, decided to divide Africa among themselves for their own benefit. So for me, I do not see an African sincerely being a foreigner on African soil. But having said that, you know that some of these things are politically sensitive. You know that you are part of a problem. Why don't you be part of solving that problem? I think that it would be a great opportunity for Alassane Ouattara to try and be part of solving the problem in the Ivory Coast rather than exacerbating it.
How about the saying that societies or communities get leaders that they deserve? These leaders that you've referred to as gifts from God are what people need. People are always yearning for leadership, and it's very rare to come across people who have those impeccable skills, who have stellar careers in what you characterize as the presidency. There are very few people who have aspired to those positions, and the few that are there think that they are doing a remarkable job.
That's not democracy. That's not social justice.
But they subject themselves for periodic elections. Take, for example, the person we are discussing right now, Alassane Ouattara. He's subjecting himself to an election. Isn't that democracy?
It is interesting that you qualify it by saying periodic elections. What does periodic elections mean? In fact, it is the other name for periodic elections is periodic selections. Those are elections that are organized and controlled by the incumbent presidents in their countries. These are people who make sure that they appoint nearly, if not all, the members of the Electoral Commission. The members of the Electoral Commission eventually conduct these elections. And when they come up with the results, there is incontrovertible evidence that most of the results of those type of event that you call elections and others call selections are usually not reflections of the will of the people, but the will of those who count the votes. And in some cases, the will of the individual who announces the results, which always, of course, end up reflecting a victory for the incumbent president. Remember, English is a very interesting language. It actually has a saying that whoever pays the piper calls the tune.
And let's move on to another topic. When you talk to any Nigerian, you've been to Nigeria, I've been to Nigeria a couple of times, when you see police, you literally want to hide because they're known as the notorious policemen. And I think it got to a point whereby people were fed up and people started demonstrating. And as a result, the president decided to abolish this notorious squad. But what is striking or what is interesting is the simple fact that they didn't ban the squad, but they rather reassigned them to different units. Let's start there.
Yeah, I think Ngupor, reassigning them to other units is not a solution. As a matter of fact, first of all, we have to look at the fundamental root causes of why the police in Nigeria behaves the way you said it behaves. Just like many other countries, the police in Nigeria is a police force, meaning it is there to protect the interests and property of the ogres, the most powerful, the most elite members of society, and not your average day type of citizen. What is really needed, I think part of the problem can only be seen in a much broader context. I have often said that one of my respected professor friends, Ghanaian born George Aite, has often said that when you look at Africa, when African countries were regaining political independence, they inherited a colonial vehicle. And basically all they did then was changing the driver. He says that in fact what is needed is to come up with a new vehicle that reflects the social, economic, cultural, political values of an African republic. And so when you look at the police, you are essentially looking at a symptom that is reflected in the colonial vehicle that Nigeria inherited.
Let's go to an interesting comment from Kelvin Agioboyede. He says, what gives you the moral authority to lecture us on police reforms in Nigeria when in the US there are no police reforms and we see black people being killed on the streets every day?
Kelvin, I'm afraid that you have a point, but you know, two wrongs do not make a right. I am saying this because I am a very proud African. I would like to see our people treated with dignity on the African continent, whether they be Nigerian, whether they be Ugandans, where I was born and I come from, whether they be Tanzanians, whether they be Ivorians, Ghanaians, Egyptians. I would like to see our people treated with dignity. I would like to see a police force turned into a police service to serve the interests of our people.
Another commenter, Facebook commenter from Jennifer, she says that in her view, police poses the most existential threat to the citizenry of most African countries. You have police brutality everywhere. It's not just a Nigerian problem.
Jennifer is correct. You see, at the end of the day, I think part of the problem, frankly, is that most of Africa does not enjoy what is called social justice for all. You have a ruling class which uses police in a manner that protects its interests and property. It is focused on that. It does not value the vast majority of the people in the republic.
How about people who say that it's not just about reforms written on paper, but it's also going to take a mindset change from the policemen themselves? Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with individuals. Some of these individuals are rogue, or they want to do their own thing, not to follow what is on the books or what the law says. So literally, they take matters into their own hands. How about that?
You have a very good point, Ndugupol. Again, I think what is needed is a new type of training, for the police. A training, again, that is a reflection of the indigenous African values, the values of fairness, the values of respect, the values of dignity, the values of brotherhood, sisterhood, the values of a police that submits itself as an agency or as a service that respects its people. That's what is needed. I think, again, like I said, what is required is not necessarily just some basic reforms. What is required are fundamental changes in the attitudes and the mindsets of the powers that be and the security forces.
Well, Shaka, thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome, Ndugu.